Jax was running, not from anything in particular, just towards the horizon, a habit ingrained from years spent alone. His paws, large and calloused, ate up the miles of dense forest, the scent of pine and damp earth a familiar comfort. He was an outcast, a lone wolf by circumstance rather than choice, his original pack decimated by a sickness that had swept through their valley years ago. Since then, the wilderness had been his only constant companion. His wolf form was powerful, a creature of slate-gray fur and eyes like chips of winter ice, but hunger gnawed at his belly. The last decent meal had been days ago, a scrawny rabbit that had barely blunted the edge of his need. He pushed onward, hopping to find richer hunting grounds, a place where game was more plentiful. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fading orange, a new scent reached him, carried on the evening breeze. It was faint, almost lost beneath the stronger odors of pine and wet soil, but it was unmistakably wolf. Not just any wolf, but the complex, layered scent of a pack, wood smoke, a hint of cultivated herbs, the underlying musk of many wolves living together. Caution warred with a desperate, aching loneliness within him. Packs were territorial, rarely welcoming strangers. Yet the thought of shared warmth, of not having to face another cold night utterly alone, was a powerful lure. His injuries from a recent scuffle with a territorial bear were also making themselves known, a dull throb in his left shoulder slowing his pace. He followed the scent carefully, his movements now slower, more deliberate, every sense on high alert. The trees thinned and he saw it, a small hidden valley nestled between steep protective ridges. A clear stream gurgled through its center, and a handful of sturdy log cabins, smoke curling invitingly from their stone chimneys, were clustered near a large, communal longhouse. It was a small pack, well concealed. Now Jax hesitated at the edge of the tree line, the scent of the pack stronger now, making his own wolf restless. He could turn back, continue his solitary existence. But the throb in his shoulder, the gnawing emptiness in his stomach, and a deeper, more profound emptiness in his soul urged him forward. He shifted, the change from wolf to man a familiar ripple of bone and muscle, though it sent a fresh wave of pain through his injured shoulder. He stood, tall and lean in his worn leathers, his gray eyes scanning the village. He needed to appear non-threatening, a traveler seeking temporary shelter, not a rogue looking for trouble. As he took his first tentative step into the clearing, a figure emerged from the largest cabin, the one that smelled faintly of the alpha. It was a young woman. Her hair was the color of dark honey, braided loosely over one shoulder, and her eyes, a warm, clear brown, widened slightly as she saw him. She wore simple, practical leathers, a satchel of herbs slung across her body. She was not a warrior, he sensed, but there was a quiet strength in her stance, a gentle aura that was surprisingly disarming. This was Lena. She had been gathering late-blooming moonflower by the stream when an unfamiliar scent, sharp and wild, had reached her. Her pack, the Crescent Ridge pack, was small and valued its seclusion. Strangers were rare and usually cause for alarm. She had expected a threat, a rogue wolf perhaps. But the man who now stood at the edge of their village, though clearly a wanderer and bearing the marks of a hard life, did not immediately radiate malice. He looked weary, and there was something else in his ice-blue eyes, a flicker of something lost and lonely that resonated with an unexpected pang in her own chest. Their gazes met, and for a breathless moment the world seemed to stop. A jolt, an invisible current of energy arced between them. Lena's breath caught. Her inner wolf, usually a calm and gentle presence, stirred with a sudden, intense awareness, a low hum of recognition she had never felt before. It was disorienting, powerful, and utterly confusing. Jax felt it too, a shock that went deeper than his injuries, more profound than his hunger. This woman, her scent, her presence, it called to something ancient and primal within him. He had heard tales from other loners, whispers of a bond so deep it could rewrite a wolf's entire existence. He had always dismissed them as fanciful dreams of a life he would never know. Until now. The world seemed to hold its breath in that single, charged moment as Jax and Lena stared at each other. The raw, undeniable pull between them was a silent thunder, a force that eclipsed the quiet sounds of the approaching dusk and the distant murmur of the Crescent Ridge pack. Lena's warm brown eyes, usually so calm and observant, were wide with a mixture of shock, confusion, and a dawning awareness that sent a shiver down her spine. Her wolf was restless, a strange song of yearning and recognition echoing within her. Jax, for his part, felt rooted to the spot. This young woman, with her gentle aura and eyes that seemed to see past his rough exterior, had just overturned his solitary, guarded existence. The word mate thundered in his soul, a terrifying, exhilarating truth. His own wolf, long starved for connection, urged him forward to claim, to protect. But years of being an outcast, of facing suspicion and hostility, kept his feet planted, his expression wary despite the storm raging within him. Lena was the first to break the spell, her voice a soft, hesitant whisper. Who are you? What brings you to Crescent Ridge?" Before Jax could formulate a reply that wouldn't betray the turmoil inside him, a sharp bark cut through the air. Two powerfully built wolves, their fur the color of dark earth and mountain stone, emerged from the tree line to Lena's left, their stances alert, their growls low and menacing as they scented a stranger. They positioned themselves protectively near Lena, their eyes fixed on Jax. Jax tensed, his instincts screaming. He was outnumbered, injured, and on unfamiliar territory. He made sure his hands were visible, open, trying to signal he was not an immediate threat, though his heart pounded against his ribs. The commotion drew others. An older, silver-muzzled wolf, his presence radiating quiet authority, stepped out from the main longhouse. This was Marcus, Lena's father and the alpha of the Crescent Ridge pack. His gaze, wise and discerning, took in Jax's worn appearance, the faint scent of old blood and injury clinging to him, and then, with a slight narrowing of his eyes, the almost palpable tension arcing between the stranger and his daughter. "Lena, step back," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. Lena, though her gaze kept flickering back to Jax with a confused, questioning look, obeyed her father, retreating slightly behind the two guard wolves. Marcus addressed Jax. "You are on Crescent Ridge land, stranger. State your name and your purpose." Jax met the alpha's steady gaze. "My name is Jax. I am a traveler. I was seeking new hunting grounds. I meant no intrusion." He deliberately didn't mention his injury, not wanting to appear weak, though a sharp twinge from his shoulder reminded him of its presence. The alpha's eyes swept over him again, lingering for a moment on Jax's left shoulder, where the torn leather of his tunic hinted at the wound beneath. "A lone wolf, then," Marcus observed, his tone neutral. "Lone wolves rarely travel so close to settled pack lands unless they are desperate or seeking trouble." "I seek neither, Alpha," Jax replied, his voice level. "Only passage, perhaps a place to rest before I move on." Lena watched the exchange, her heart a confusing mix of anxiety for the stranger and a strange, protective urge she couldn't explain. The way Jack stood, weary but with an unbroken pride, the flicker of loneliness she'd seen in his ice-blue eyes, it called to her. And the bond, that terrifying, exhilarating pull, it was still there, a vibrant hum beneath her skin. "He's injured, father," Lena said suddenly, her voice quiet but clear. Both Jax and Marcus looked at her in surprise. "His shoulder. I can smell the blood, old and new." Marcus's gaze softened slightly as he looked at his daughter, then back at Jax with renewed scrutiny. An injured lone wolf was less of a threat, perhaps, but also a potential burden or a sign of a greater conflict nearby. "An injury," Marcus prompted. Jax hesitated, then gave a curt nod. "A disagreement with a bear, it was some days ago." The alpha considered him for a long moment. The pack needed to be cautious. But the laws of hospitality, even to a lone wolf, dictated certain actions, especially if the stranger was truly just passing through and injured. And there was something in his daughter's eyes, a plea she wasn't voicing, that he couldn't ignore. "We are a secluded pack, Jax," Marcus said finally. "We do not often welcome outsiders, but you are injured and the night grows cold." He made a decision. "You may have shelter for the night. Our healer will tend to your wounds. In the morning we will speak again and you will continue on your way." It was a dismissal, but also an offering of temporary sanctuary. Relief so potent it almost buckled his knees washed over Jax. He gave a respectful nod. "Thank you, Alpha Marcus. I am in your debt." Two of Marcus's warriors stepped forward, their expressions still wary, but no longer overtly hostile. They flanked Jax, gesturing for him to walk towards the village center. As he moved, his gaze met Lena's one last time. The connection between them flared again, a silent acknowledgement of the strange, powerful current that had passed between them. Her brown eyes were filled with a mixture of concern, curiosity, and a deep, unsettling recognition that mirrored his own. Now, Jax was escorted to a small, empty cabin on the edge of the village. Lena watched him go, her heart a battlefield of emotions. Her father placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He will be watched, Lena. Do not concern yourself unduly." But Lena knew it was too late for that. The stranger named Jax, with his ice-blue eyes and the soul-deep call of a fated bond, had already breached defenses she hadn't even known she possessed. Her quiet, ordered life in Crescent Ridge had just been irrevocably altered. Lena found herself drawn to the small cabin where Jax had been given shelter. Her official duty as one of the pack's healers was to tend to his wounds. Unofficially, an undeniable curiosity and the persistent, thrumming awareness of the bond she'd felt pulled her there. Her father, Alpha Marcus, had given his reluctant permission, but with a stern warning to remain cautious. Jax was awake when she entered, his ice-blue eyes instantly finding hers. He was sitting on the edge of the simple cot, his injured shoulder bared, the skin around the deep gashes inflamed and angry. He had clearly tried to clean it himself, but the wound needed proper attention. Despite the pain that must have been considerable, his expression was guarded, his body tense. "Princess," he said, his voice a low rumble. He had heard the pack refer to her as the Alpha's daughter. "It's Lena," she corrected gently, setting down her satchel of herbs and clean linen. "And I'm here to tend to your shoulder, Jax." He watched her with an unnerving intensity as she approached. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the scent of wild wolf and something uniquely him that made her own wolf stir within her. It was both unsettling and deeply alluring. She focused on her task, her movements calm and practiced as she cleaned the wound with a herbal infusion and began to apply a soothing poultice of crushed comfrey root and silver willow bark. "You are skilled," Jax observed, his voice still rough, when she began to bind the wound with fresh linen. His gaze never left her face. "I've had practice," Lena replied softly. "Life in the mountains can be harsh." A silence fell between them, thick with unspoken questions and the vibrant, almost audible hum of the mate bond neither of them yet fully understood or acknowledged aloud. Lena could feel his eyes on her, and a warmth spread through her cheeks. She tried to focus on securing the bandage, but her fingers fumbled slightly. "Why did you speak for me?" Jax asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "To your alpha, you did not have to." Lena paused, her gaze meeting his. His ice-blue eyes were searching, trying to understand her motives. "You were injured," she said simply, "and you didn't seem like a threat, not truly. Not like the other rogues we've encountered," she added silently. "And because this strange, powerful connection between us makes me want to." Jax considered her words, his expression unreadable. Trusting a lone wolf is a dangerous habit, healer. "Perhaps," she conceded, "but sometimes even lone wolves need a little kindness." As she finished, their hands brushed. A jolt, stronger this time, passed between them. Both pulled back as if burned, their eyes locking for a charged moment. The air crackled. Later that day, as Jax rested, the pack's sentiment towards him remained divided. Young warriors, eager to prove themselves, saw him as a potential rival or a spy. Kale, a burly enforcer and one of Lena's most persistent, though unwelcome, suitors, was particularly vocal in his distrust. "He's a rogue alpha," Kale argued loudly in the longhouse, unaware that Jax, with his keen hearing, could likely discern every word even from his cabin. "No pack, no loyalty. He could be scouting for enemies or worse, be the cause of the recent disturbances in the lower valley." "He was injured and alone," Kale, Alpha Marcus replied, his voice calm but firm. "We offered him shelter for one night, as is custom. He will be gone by morning." "And if he is," Kale pressed, "if he tries to stay, what then?" Lena seems interested in him. His voice held a possessive, accusing tone that made Lena, who had just entered the longhouse, bristle. "My interest, Kale, is in ensuring a guest of this pack, however temporary, is treated with basic decency, especially when injured," Lena interjected, her voice cool and steady, though her heart pounded. "And last I checked, compassion was not a crime in Crescent Ridge." Kale sneered. Compassion for a rogue could be a death sentence for the pack princess. Before Lena could retort, Jax appeared in the doorway of the longhouse. He had managed to pull on a fresh tunic Lena had left for him, but he still looked weary, his face pale beneath his tan. His ice-blue eyes, however, were clear and sharp, and they were fixed on Kale with a dangerous glint. "If you have an accusation to make, Wolf," Jax said, his voice a low, quiet growl that nonetheless silenced the entire longhouse, "make it to my face, not to the Alpha's daughter behind my back." The tension in the room became a palpable thing. Kale, though larger than Jax, took an involuntary step back from the sheer cold menace in the stranger's voice. Alpha Marcus watched, his expression unreadable. Lena felt a thrill of fear, not for herself, but for what Jax might do, and a surprising surge of protectiveness towards him. This lone wolf, this outsider, was being unfairly judged, and she found she could not stand by and let it happen. The air in the longhouse crackled with unspoken aggression. Kale, though momentarily silenced by Jax's cold challenge, bristled, his own wolf clearly insulted. Other warriors of the Crescent Ridge pack shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between the stranger and their alpha. Before Kale could retort or any further conflict could erupt, Alpha Marcus raised a hand, his expression calm but unyielding. "Enough," he stated, his voice carrying the quiet authority that needed no volume. He looked from Kale to Jax, then his gaze settled on his daughter Lena, who stood near the entrance, her expression a mixture of worry and a strange, fierce protectiveness for the outsider. "Jax," Marcus said, turning back to him, "you were offered shelter for your wounds, not an invitation to challenge the warriors of my pack." "I made no challenge, Alpha," Jax replied, his voice still low but firm. "I merely prefer accusations be made to my face." Marcus nodded slowly, a flicker of something, perhaps respect, perhaps further caution in his eyes. "A fair preference." He then addressed Kale. "And you, Kale, will hold your tongue. The stranger is under my protection for this night. His actions, not your assumptions, will determine our judgment of him." Kale grunted, clearly displeased, but subsided under his alpha's command, shooting a final venomous glare at Jax before retreating to the shadows of the longhouse. The tension eased slightly, but a current of suspicion still lingered. Later, as the last embers of the central hearth glowed, Lena found Jax outside his small cabin. He was staring up at the star-dusted sky, the chill night air doing little to cool the turmoil she sensed within him. His shoulder, she noted, was still stiff, though her poultice had clearly reduced some of the inflammation. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, approaching him cautiously. Jax turned, his ice-blue eyes finding hers in the darkness. The raw intensity she'd seen earlier was banked, replaced by a weary guardedness. "As well as can be expected for a wolf in another's den," he said, a hint of bitterness in his tone. "Kale can be protective," Lena offered, though she knew it was a poor excuse for his hostility. "He doesn't trust outsiders easily." "Few packs do," Jax replied. He paused, then asked, his voice carefully neutral, "Why did you speak for me again, healer? First about my injury, then in the longhouse." Lena felt a blush creep up her neck. "I told you it seemed unjust, and because this inexplicable connection to you makes me want to shield you, even from my own." She couldn't say that, of course. "And I do not believe you mean us harm." A faint, almost imperceptible softening occurred around Jax's mouth. "Your trust is unexpected." He looked away, back towards the distant, snow-capped peaks that ringed their valley. "My pack, we were not like this. We were smaller, more isolated. We were wiped out by a sickness that came on the winter winds. I was the only one young enough, or perhaps just lucky enough, to survive." His words were stark, devoid of self-pity, but they painted a bleak picture of loss and enduring solitude. Lena's heart ached for him. For the first time, she saw beyond the lone wolf, the potential threat to the survivor beneath, a soul as scarred as his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Jax," she whispered. He shrugged, a gesture that didn't quite mask the pain in his eyes. It was a long time ago. He fell silent, and Lena sensed he would say no more about his past, not yet. The bond between them pulsed, a silent current of shared understanding and an undeniable, dangerous attraction. She felt an almost overwhelming urge to reach out, to touch him, to offer some comfort beyond words, but she held back, unsure of his reaction, unsure of her own feelings. Just then, a haunting howl echoed from the high ridges bordering their valley, not the familiar call of a Crescent Ridge wolf, but something wilder, tinged with a desperate hunger and a chilling note of aggression. It was followed by another, then another. Now Jax stiffened instantly, his head snapping up, every line of his body suddenly alert, the weary traveler replaced by the keen-edged predator. "Rogues," he breathed, his voice a low growl. "And more than one, they're close." Lena felt a shiver of fear. Rogue attacks were rare in their secluded valley, but not unheard of, especially when game was scarce in the outer territories. Alpha Marcus emerged from the longhouse, his face grim, flanked by Kale and two other senior warriors. "Scouts reported a large rogue pack moving through the Deadwood Pass this morning," Marcus announced, his gaze sweeping the perimeter of the village. "It seems they've found their way to our borders sooner than expected." He looked at Jax, a new, hard assessment in his eyes. A lone wolf seeking shelter is one thing, a pack of hungry rogues is another. The implication was clear. Jax, despite his injury, was now even more of a liability, his presence potentially attracting unwanted attention, or worse, being mistaken for an associate of the approaching threat. He knew with a sinking heart that his brief respite in this strangely welcoming valley was likely over. The pack would close ranks, and he would once again be the outsider, the one to be cast out before the true danger arrived. The news of the approaching rogue pack settled like a shroud over Crescent Ridge. Jax felt the shift immediately, the increased patrols, the grim set of the warriors' jaws, the hushed, anxious whispers among the pack members, and the renewed suspicion in their eyes whenever they looked at him. He was an outsider, a potential weakness, or worse, a scout for the very enemy now threatening their borders. His healing shoulder still ached, a dull throb that was a constant reminder of his vulnerability. The brief sanctuary he had found felt more precarious than ever. He knew what he had to do. As the first pale light of dawn touched the peaks, Jax slipped from his cabin, a small bundle of his meager belongings in hand. He would leave before Alpha Marcus made the decision for him, before he brought any more trouble to Lena or her pack. The pull towards Lena was a physical ache, a constant thrum beneath his skin, but his ingrained lone wolf instinct screamed that he was a danger to her, to them all. He hadn't made it past the edge of the clearing when a soft voice stopped him. "Leaving so soon, Jax?" Lena stood there, her arms crossed, her warm brown eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and an emotion he couldn't quite name, and perhaps fear. She had clearly been waiting for him, or had sensed his departure. "It's for the best, healer," Jax said, his voice rough. "I'm a magnet for trouble. Your pack doesn't need more of it, not with rogues at your border." "And you think facing them alone, injured, is better?" Lena challenged, stepping closer. The scent of her, wild herbs, and the unique fragrance of her wolf assailed him, weakening his resolve. "You're not fully healed, you'd be an easy target." "I've survived alone for a long time," Jax countered, though her concern sent an unexpected warmth through him. "But you don't have to, not now," she whispered, her gaze searching his. This feeling between us, Jax, it's real, isn't it?" He couldn't deny it, not when her eyes held such honesty, such raw vulnerability that mirrored his own hidden turmoil. He gave a curt, almost pained nod. "It seems so." Before either could say more, a series of frantic yelps and a child's terrified scream tore through the morning quiet from the direction of the forest's edge, near the stream. Instantly, both Jax and Lena tensed, their wolves surging to the surface. Without a word, they raced towards the sound. A young pack pup no more than 6 seasons old had wandered too close to a thicket where a gaunt, desperate-looking mountain cat, its eyes blazing with hunger, had cornered him. The pup was yelping in terror, backing away from the snarling feline. Several pack warriors were already converging, but Jax and Lena were closest. The mountain cat, seeing more wolves approach, tensed to spring at the pup. There was no time for a coordinated pack attack. Jax reacted on pure instinct. With a guttural roar that was pure wolf, he launched himself forward, his still healing shoulder protesting, but he ignored the pain. He slammed into the mountain cat, his greater weight and desperate strength sending it tumbling away from the terrified pup. The cat, enraged, turned on him, claws extended, hissing. Lena, meanwhile, had snatched up the crying pup, shielding him with her body and ushering him quickly towards the approaching warriors, her healer's instincts overriding everything else. Jax faced the mountain cat alone for a moment, a blur of gray fur and snapping teeth. He took a swipe to his uninjured arm, but his fury, fueled by the threat to the pup and perhaps by the presence of Lena nearby, was immense. He fought with the desperation of a wolf who had nothing left to lose and then suddenly something to protect. With a final, savage snarl and a well-aimed bite, the fight was over. The mountain cat lay still. Panting, blood dripping from a fresh scratch on his forearm, Jax stood over it, his ice-blue eyes still blazing with primal fury. Lena, having ensured the pup was safe, rushed back to his side, her expression a mixture of terror and awe. Alpha Marcus and his warriors arrived, taking in the scene the dead mountain cat, the shaken but unharmed pup being comforted by its mother, and Jax standing protective and bloodied. Kale was among them, his usual sneer replaced by a look of grudging surprise. Marcus approached Jax slowly, his gaze unreadable. "You saved the pup," he stated, his voice a low rumble, "at considerable risk to yourself." Jax merely nodded, still catching his breath, his eyes flicking to Lena, who was already reaching into her satchel for bandages. Later that day, after Lena had tended to his new wounds with a quiet efficiency that both soothed and unsettled him with its intimacy, Alpha Marcus summoned Jax to the longhouse. "You fought bravely today, Jax," the Alpha said, his eyes thoughtful. "You protected one of ours. That speaks louder than any suspicion." He paused. "The rogue pack is a genuine threat. They are numerous, and their leader is said to be a brutal wolf named Scarfang, driven by a hunger for territory and blood." Jax listened, his expression stoic. "You are still an outsider," Marcus continued, "but you are also connected to my daughter in a way that even I cannot ignore or deny. The mate bond is sacred and rare, and it has chosen." He looked at Jax, a new weight in his gaze. "I offer you a choice, Jax. You can leave now as you intended and face the wilderness and Scarfang's rogues alone. Or you can stay, fight with us for us. Prove your loyalty not just with instinct, but with commitment." Proves that the bond you share with Lena is one that will strengthen this pack, not divide it. The choice hung in the air: to return to the lonely, dangerous freedom he knew, or to embrace this fragile, terrifying chance at something more, a pack, a purpose, a mate. He looked towards the doorway where he knew Lena was likely waiting, listening. He thought of her courage, her kindness, the way her presence seemed to soothe the ancient ache in his soul. With a deep breath, Jax met the Alpha's gaze. "I will stay, Alpha Marcus," he said, his voice firm. "I will fight for Crescent Ridge, and I will protect your daughter with my life." An unspoken vow, a choice made. As the shadow of Scarfang's rogue pack loomed larger, Jax, the lone wolf, had found a reason to stand his ground. The news of Scarfang's advancing rogue pack threw Crescent Ridge into a state of disciplined urgency. Alpha Marcus, his face grim, quickly mobilized his warriors. Scouts confirmed the rogues were numerous and moving with a desperate, brutal speed, likely driven by starvation and the iron will of their notorious leader. Every wolf in Crescent Ridge knew this would be a fight for their very survival. Now Jax, his decision to stay and fight solidifying with every beat of his determined heart, found himself an uneasy addition to their war council. Some warriors, like Kale, still eyed him with suspicion, their loyalty to their own making them wary of an outsider whose past was a mystery. But Alpha Marcus, seeing the steel in Jax's ice-blue eyes and perhaps sensing the undeniable protective aura Jax now projected towards Lena, assigned him a critical position on the western flank, the most likely point of attack, given the terrain. "You fight like a lone wolf, Jax, with skill born of harsh necessity," Marcus had said, his voice devoid of its earlier skepticism. "Show us that strength now, not for yourself but for this pack, for Lena." The unspoken acknowledgement of their bond hung heavy in the air. Lena, meanwhile, worked tirelessly, her usual calm demeanor now underscored by a quiet, fierce determination. She organized the other healers, prepared poultices and bandages, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, but her heart was a knot of anxiety. Every time her gaze met Jax's across the bustling village square as they prepared, a jolt of fear for his safety, mingled with a fierce pride in his decision to stand with them, shot through her. The attack came just as the twin moons began their ascent, casting long, eerie shadows across the valley. A chorus of savage howls ripped through the night, and then Scarfang's rogues poured from the darkened treeline, a wave of desperate, snarling fury. They were gaunt, their fur matted, their eyes glowing with a feral hunger, but they fought with a terrifying lack of self-preservation. Jax met the first wave alongside the Crescent Ridge warriors. He moved with a brutal grace, his attacks swift and decisive. Years of solitary survival had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. He fought not with the coordinated pack tactics of the others, but with an unpredictable ferocity that surprised and often overwhelmed his opponents. He became a gray whirlwind of claw and fang, his ice-blue eyes blazing with a cold, controlled rage. He saw Kale fighting nearby, hard-pressed, and without a word, Jax moved to cover his flank, felling two rogues who were about to overwhelm the burly enforcer. Kale shot him a look of stunned, grudging acknowledgement before turning back to the fray. Lena was a beacon of calm amidst the chaos, stationed near the longhouse where the wounded were being brought. She worked with focused intensity, her healing hands staunching bleeding wounds, setting broken bones, her soft voice murmuring words of comfort to the injured warriors. but her gaze kept straying to the western flank, searching for Jax amidst the swirling melee. The battle raged. Scarfang's rogues were more numerous than anticipated, and they fought with the savagery of cornered animals. Several Crescent Ridge warriors fell, their cries cut short. Lena's heart ached for each loss, but she pushed down her grief, her duty to the living paramount. Then a gap opened in the defensive line near where she worked. A hulking rogue, larger than the others, with a vicious scar bisecting its muzzle, Scarfang himself, Lena realized with a sickening lurch of terror, broke through, his eyes fixed on the vulnerable healers and the wounded. He lunged towards Lena, a triumphant snarl ripping from his throat. The time seemed to slow. Lena saw the flash of his teeth, smelled his rank, bloodthirsty scent. She knew she couldn't outfight him. But then a gray blur intercepted him. Jax. He slammed into Scarfang with the force of a battering ram, his own snarl echoing the rogue leaders. The two alphas, for Jax's inherent power was undeniable now, blazing forth in his desperate need to protect, crashed to the ground in a furious tangle of fur and fury. Lena screamed Jax's name, her healer's instincts warring with the overwhelming urge to flee, but she couldn't leave him. The fight between Jax and Scarfang was brutal, primal. Scarfang was larger, his rage fueled by desperation. But Jax fought with something more, the protective fury of a wolf defending not just territory but his mate, his newfound pack. He took savage wounds, his fur darkening with his own blood, but he did not yield. Seeing Jax falter for a moment under a particularly vicious attack, Lena acted. Ignoring the danger, she snatched up a fallen warrior's heavy spear. With a cry born of terror and a love she could no longer deny, she charged, plunging the spearhead into Scarfang's exposed side as he reared up to deliver a killing blow to Jax. The rogue alpha howled in agony and surprise, his attack on Jax broken. That momentary distraction was all Jax needed. With a final, desperate surge of strength, he locked his jaws on Scarfang's throat, ending the rogue leader's reign of terror. Silence, broken only by the ragged panting of Ndi the wounded, descended upon the battlefield. The remaining rogues, seeing their leader fall, wavered, then broke, scattering back into the dark forest from whence they came. Crescent Ridge was safe. Jax, bleeding from a dozen wounds, staggered to his feet. His ice-blue eyes found Lena's. She was trembling, the bloodied spear still clutched in her hands, her face pale but resolute. He limped towards her, collapsing to his knees before her, his head bowed. Lena dropped the spear and sank to her knees beside him, her hands immediately going to his wounds, tears of relief and terror streaming down her face. Jax, oh, Jax. He looked up at her, his gaze raw, vulnerable, filled with an emotion so profound it made her heart ache. The barriers between them, the suspicion, the fear, the unspoken words, they had all been burned away in the crucible of battle. All that remained was the undeniable, unbreakable truth of their bond. In the chaotic aftermath of the battle, with the last of Scarfang's defeated rogues vanishing into the shadowed forest, Lena's world narrowed to the grievously wounded wolf kneeling before her. Jax was bleeding heavily, his breathing ragged, but his ice-blue eyes, when they met hers, held a raw vulnerability and an unwavering focus that spoke only of her. Jax, you're hurt badly, she whispered, her healer's hands already assessing his wounds, pushing aside her own terror and exhaustion. The gash from the mountain cat on his arm had reopened, and fresh, deeper cuts adorned his torso and leg from his brutal fight with Scarfang. He merely grunted a pained sound, but his gaze didn't leave her face. You saved me, Lena, that spear. And you saved the pack, you saved me, she countered softly, her fingers gently probing a deep laceration on his side. He flinched but didn't pull away. The trust in that small gesture made her heart ache. Warriors of Crescent Ridge began to gather around them, their initial shock giving way to a dawning respect for the lone wolf who had fought so fiercely for them. Even Kale approached, his usual arrogance gone, replaced by a look of grudging admiration. You fight like a demon, rogue, he admitted, offering a hand to help Jax, who was struggling to remain upright. Jax, surprised, accepted the assistance. Alpha Marcus arrived, his wise eyes taking in the scene, his daughter, bloodied but safe, tending to the equally bloodied stranger who had just saved them all. He looked at the undeniable connection between Jax and Lena, at the way their wolves, even in their exhaustion, seemed to call to each other. Healer Myra is tending to the others, Marcus said to Lena. Bring Jax to my cabin, his wounds are severe. With Kale and another warrior supporting him, Jax was helped to the Alpha's longhouse. Lena never left his side, cleaning and stitching his wounds with a focused intensity, her touch gentle but firm. He bore the pain with stoic silence, his gaze often finding hers, a silent conversation passing between them that spoke volumes of shared peril and a bond forged in fire. Once Jax was bandaged and resting, weak but stable, Alpha Marcus sat with them. The old Alpha looked at Jax for a long moment, then at his daughter, whose hand rested protectively on Jax's uninjured arm. You fought for this pack as if it were your own, Jax, Marcus said finally, his voice filled with a respect that transcended Jax's outsider status. You saved many lives today, including my daughter's. Crescent Ridge is in your debt. He paused, his gaze softening as he looked at the pair. And it is clear to me, as it must be to all who have eyes to see, that a sacred bond has formed between you. The great wolf has chosen. Lena blushed, but her gaze on Jax was unwavering. Jax, though weary, met the Alpha's eyes directly. She is my mate, Alpha Marcus. I knew it the moment I saw her. Marcus nodded. Then you are no longer a lone wolf, Jax, unless you choose to be. There is a place for you here in Crescent Ridge, by Lena's side. As her mate, as a warrior of this pack, if you will have it. A wave of emotion, so powerful it almost overwhelmed him, washed over Jax. A pack, a mate, a home, things he had long thought lost to him forever. He looked at Lena, at the hope and affection shining in her warm brown eyes, and his decision was made. I would be honored, Alpha, Jax said, his voice thick with emotion. In the days that followed, as Jax healed under Lena's devoted care, the last vestiges of suspicion from the pack melted away, replaced by acceptance and gratitude. He was no longer Jax the rogue, but Jax, Lena's mate, the hero who had faced Scarfang. When he was strong enough, he and Lena finally had the chance to truly talk, to explore the depths of the bond that had so irrevocably tied their souls together. They walked by the stream where they had first met, the scent of pine and damp earth now a comforting backdrop to their quiet words. I never thought, Jax began, then hesitated, unused to baring his soul. Lena smiled gently, taking his hand. I know, she said softly, me neither, but here we are. He looked at her, his ice-blue eyes filled with a love so profound it made her heart soar. I will protect you, Lena, always, you and this pack. And I will heal you, Jax, she replied, her own love shining in her gaze, in every way that matters. Their mating ceremony was simple, held under the light of the twin moons, attended by the entire Crescent Ridge pack. Alpha Marcus formally bound their hands together, his voice resonating with joy and hope for the future. There were no grand pronouncements of undying love needed. The truth of their connection shone in their eyes, in the way they moved as one. Jax, the lone wolf, found his pack. Lena, the gentle healer, found her fierce protector and her heart's true north. Together, with Jax's strength and Lena's compassion, they would help lead Crescent Ridge into a new era of peace and prosperity, their love a beacon against any darkness the future might hold. The whispers in the forest were no longer of solitude, but of a bond that had healed two souls and united a pack, a testament to a fated love found in the heart of the wild.